bring in trial attorney Bryan Rotella. Bryan, welcome back. So the fixer versus the former president, Michael Cohen. We're going to talk about that in a second. But let's start with Stormy Daniels. The testimony was graphic, especially for a case that was based on bank records. But do you think her story about Trump was believable, or do you think the defense did do enough to discredit her?
Well, good morning, Hannah. I think summer blockbuster season came early, right? This testimony was something last week. To answer your question, and to back up just 1 minute for your audience, we have two things here, right, that this has to be found in this trial. This jury has to decide. One is motive, two is crime. The testimony from Stormy Daniels was all about motive, meaning that this was so bad, what happened, this encounter between her and Donald Trump, that he would want to pay her off. That's what the whole reason that they put Stormy Daniels up. I do think they got there, the prosecution got there, but with stuff that, quite frankly, I've never heard before, including that she felt somewhat intimidated, that there was a bodyguard outside. She thought that Donald Trump's height and size was intimidating, and that she blacked out and was wound up on the bed. That sounds a lot more like a Harvey Weinstein or some type of Me Too situation, Hannah. And quite frankly, I think that the evidence coming in is going to be damaging at some point on an appeal. But I do think it got the prosecution to the motive going, you know, the jury's going to be thinking, I think Donald Trump may have wanted to pay off covering this up.
Yeah, I want to add to that because Trump's team has argued based on Stormy's testimony for a mistrial. We should mention the judge has denied this twice. Do you agree with the judge's ruling? And do you think the Trump team have grounds for a mistrial, especially considering they asked for it twice?
Well, not just being a trial attorney, I'm actually a private judge. Parties pay me to be an arbitrator. I don't know a judge or an arbitrator that's going to grant a mistrial that was about them and a ruling they did. So I don't think this judge was ever going to do that. I do think, based on what we just said, this is kind of like, think about if it was an Al Capone trial about tax fraud and you were hearing about really gruesome murders to try to show motive that he would commit tax fraud. That's what I think happened here. I think Stormy's testimony, while it may get them a verdict, meaning the prosecution, it may get a verdict against Donald Trump. I do think it sets up a real possibility for mistrial on appeal because it was so prejudicial. The jury's going to be like, he would do anything after what they heard from Stormy.
Yeah, even the judge said the jury did not need to hear all of those details. Do you think the prosecution got what they needed at the end?
I do. I absolutely do, for motive. Now, the other thing that we were saying is that they have to prove the alleged crime. That goes into the fireworks for this coming week with Michael Cohen. Because now you have to prove, well, it was so bad that Donald Trump didn't just pay her off with a settlement agreement. It happens all the time that said Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels, no admission of liability. He actually made the decision, Donald Trump, this has to be covered up as payment for legal fees to Michael Cohen so that it wouldn't impact him in the 2016 election. That's what Michael Cohen's testimony is going to be all about this week, is he's got to put that piece together for the prosecution. Now, all that said, I think Stormy got them so far that the jury may say, you know what, regardless of what Cohen says, we think Donald Trump may have done anything based on Stormy's tale from this past week.
And Cohen's already being painted not as a credible witness. I do want to talk about him moving forward. Before we jump to Cohen, prosecution say they're no longer calling Karen McDougal, that is another alleged mistress of the former president, to the stand. Why is that? Do you think Stormy Daniels' testimony played a role?
Absolutely. I think that they said, you know, all that Karen McDougal could do would be water down the testimony they got from Stormy Daniels. The judge let in what, again, I only sounded like more like a Harvey Weinstein and alleged sexual assault almost type of case. I'm the prosecution. Again, if I'm trying to get motive that someone would be so concerned they would want to pay off to cover this up and then ultimately change the way they paid it off to be look like legal fees. Stormy got him there. I wouldn't do anything with Karen McDougal that could ultimately get the jury going, you know what, maybe it really wasn't as bad what Stormy said.
All right, Bryan, let's move on to Michael Cohen. He is set to take the stand on Monday. I do want to share some of the stats with our viewers. He's a disbarred lawyer. He's been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. A lot is riding on this testimony. What do you think the prosecution needs from him ultimately?
They need him to act sane. And really, that's really hard here. As a trial lawyer, this is really challenging. This is your key witness. He's the one who has to prove up the alleged crime. He's out on TikTok, which I know we heard with Laura's lead into this. He's actually wearing a shirt that's got Donald Trump in an orange jumpsuit. He's selling that on this Mea Culpa thing that he has, this website. They need that to stop for the prosecution, and they need him to come across measured, thoughtful, and they need to have him come across with some remorse, going, you know what, I really never wanted to do this, and my boss made me do this, and he made me make it look like he was paying me for legal fees. He needs to come across as an empathetic witness, and that's a little bit of a high bar to get over based on what we know about Michael Cohen.
If Cohen was your client, Bryan, what would you advise him?
That's a good question. I would say, I don't know, probably chill out and relax and remember what you're here for. And this is not something to be selling shirts online about Donald Trump. You're here because this is a crime that's been brought, an alleged crime. And he's saying that a crime occurred here and that he was part of the crime. So this is really important testimony, and he needs to present as somebody that the jury is going to believe. So what I would be telling him is all these other distractions, Michael, they're not helping if you ultimately believe so strongly, which appears he does, that something wrong happened here, and he needs to get that out, and he feels that, in his opinion, that Donald Trump should be punished.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is not going to be an easy task. But of course, we'll be watching all next week. Bryan Rotella, thank you so much for the insight.